President Biden asked me to come here today really for four reasons. First, to demonstrate the commitment of the United States to Israel's security, to start to work toward greater stability and reduce tensions in the West Bank and Jerusalem, to support urgent humanitarian and reconstruction assistance for Gaza, to benefit the Palestinian people, and to continue to rebuild our relationship with the Palestinian people and the Palestinian Authority.
That was Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who held a joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Now, unfortunately, many of the same talking points that we're used to by US officials were regurgitated during this joint press conference, but there was some good news to come out of it, including incredibly important foreign aid to Gaza specifically, and I'll give you the details and the exact figures in just a moment. But there were certainly some talking points by Blinken in an attempt to draw these false equivalencies in regard to the level of violence on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, and also when it comes to casualties. And it's just not equal at all. Here's what Blinken had to say.
Intense behind the scenes diplomacy led by President Biden, working very closely with the Prime Minister, helped produce last week's ceasefire. Now we believe we must build on it. That starts with the recognition that losses on both sides were profound. Casualties are often reduced to numbers. But behind every number is an individual human being, a daughter, a son, a father, a mother, a grandparent, a best friend. And as the Talmud teaches, to lose a life is to lose the whole world, whether that life is Palestinian or Israeli. I underscored to the Prime Minister something that President Biden made crystal clear throughout the violence. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against attacks, such as the thousands of rockets fired by Hamas indiscriminately against Israeli civilians.
So he specifically says that the casualties on both sides was profound. And of course, doesn't offer any numbers, but indicates that the numbers are uneven. The numbers are uneven, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the numbers are uneven and that there was disproportionate force used on the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, because every person who dies has family. I agree, every person who dies has family members. Every person who dies, it's a tragedy, it's a loss. I'm specifically talking about civilians here. But there were hundreds of deaths on the Palestinian side and a little over a dozen deaths on the Israeli side. And that's because the military capabilities are not the same. This is asymmetrical, and they leave that part out of the story. But it's just frustrating to see the United States, even as the US media has started to evolve and shift the narrative to something that's a little more accurate. The US government has decided to continue on with their same narrative on this, which is pretty tragic because it gives you very little hope that things will change in terms of US foreign policy in the region.
So they force us into nonsensical false equivalency conversations. Is every life precious? Of course. Did Israel act that way? No. Did the US act that way? No. So the 12 Israelis that lost their lives, it's an absolute tragedy. The 239 civilians lost on the Palestinian side is also a tragedy. It is simply a tragedy that is literally 20 times higher. So if you say no, the 12 Israeli lives are worth more than the 240 Palestinian lives, well, you're a racist. And you don't believe every life is precious, so spare me your nonsensical quoting of religious texts that started this in the first place. So now, the most important part of all of what Blinken said is, okay, we're gonna rebuild Gaza. Look, I get it, no you're not, shut up. You know how you rebuild Gaza? You free them. And that doesn't mean, we kind of stopped occupying them, but we made it an open air prison because they can't control their borders. They can't really govern themselves. The West Bank can't govern themselves at all. They're dirty Palestinians who obviously should be occupied decade after decade after decade because they're too violent. So spare me your nonsense quotes from religious texts. That's, again, that part of the problem to begin with, okay? But the most important thing is, okay, we bomb it, we rebuild it, we bomb it, we rebuild it. But are you ever going to free the prisoners? And by the prisoners, I don't mean the hundreds of people that Israel is rounding up right now for daring to dissent with them within Israel. That's also happening in a so-called democracy. But now Blinken says, no, we're not going to give any money that is going to get directed to Hamas, because Hamas is a bunch of terrorists. Hamas is a bunch of terrorists because they kill civilians. Let's go through this one more time. But Israel killed 20 times the civilians. Well, they didn't mean it. They really suck at their military. They're just, oops, we killed all the civilians again. Just like last time when we killed thousands of civilians, our military sucks and doesn't know what it's doing. And it's also the best in the world. Did you know what you were doing and intentionally kill those civilians, which would definitely make you a terrorist? Or do you have one of the most incompetent militaries the world has ever seen? No, you knew what you were doing. You say, well, I'm kind of throwing rockets in the direction of possibly Hamas. And by the way, the government is Hamas. So I can call anyone Hamas inside Gaza Strip pretty much. And so, and then I happen to kill all those civilians, golly gee. No, I'm tired of the wordplay. And then they say, okay, Hamas is terrorist because they killed, one of the 12 killed was an Israeli soldier. No, the definition of whatever fake definition we had of terrorism was killing civilians, not soldiers. In the middle of an armed conflict, killing soldiers is not terrorism, it's the conflict itself. And then Israel turns around and goes, we murdered a bunch of Hamas terrorists, they're military fighters. By the way, and that's part of conflict. I say the same thing, same standard, right? But then they say, we also killed their political leaders. Now imagine if Hamas had killed Netanyahu. Oh, the terrorist, right? We're not going to give you any money that's going to go to the terrorists. But they run the post office, they run the medical buildings, they run, you know why? Because they run the government. You know why? Because they won an election. Well, no, that doesn't count because we don't like, they kill civilians. But you killed 20 times, it doesn't matter, propaganda. Those are by definition Muslim, dirty Muslim terrorists, and Israelis are beloved, knighted statesmen in a so-called democracy. So I don't know where the hell the money's gonna go, but Hamas runs the government in Gaza, whatever little there is of it. And so
the money's gonna go toward,
it's gonna go to stupid allies that will do whatever Israel and America tells them to do. Let's get real about that. If you're not sending it to Hamas, you're gonna send it to lackeys who are gonna find a way to get it to, whoever is considered safe enough. In other words, won't raise their head in rebellion as the imprisonment of millions of people continues decades on end.
This is the carrot strategy for regime change. That's what they want. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. I'll give you the details. So this is the second graphic here. Blinken announced nearly $40 million in aid to the Palestinians, including $5.5 million in emergency assistance for Gaza. That brings the US assistance to the Palestinians under the Biden administration to over $360 million after the Trump administration had cut off nearly all assistance to them. Now, the Associated Press continues to write that the United States is trying to bolster Abbas, meaning Mahmoud Abbas, who's politician for Palestinians, who was sidelined by recent events in his rivalry with Hamas and on the international stage. Abbas heads the internationally backed Palestinian Authority, which administers parts of the occupied West Bank, but whose forces were driven from Gaza when Hamas seized power there in 2007. So, I mean, you can kind of read between the lines there. This is an attempt to, push for regime change through financing. I think that there's a possibility it could help Palestinians, but at the heart of what the US is trying to do is essentially minimize the power of Hamas. I don't know how that's gonna end up. I don't think that this ongoing violence is going to just completely stop. Yes, there's a ceasefire right now, but I think the statement from Benjamin Netanyahu during this press conference is telling because he doesn't hide anything. He's very transparent about what he's demanding here. And before we go to the video, I want to read this quote where Netanyahu spoke of building economic growth in the occupied West Bank, but said there will be no peace until the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Okay, so let's stop for a second. recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So what happens to the Palestinian citizens of Israel? What happens to them? What does that mean?
They're theoretically under a democracy. Come on, let's keep it real. They're second-class citizens, etc. But look, to me, recognizing Israel as a Jewish state is a ship that has likely sailed. I know now a lot of people are saying one-state solution. Let's put everybody together and do a vote. It's the most unrealistic solution I've ever heard. Whether you think it's morally right or not, it doesn't really matter because there is a 0% chance that the Israelis would ever agree to it. Not just the right-wing government of Israel, but any government of Israel. So let's move on to productive things. Let's get to 2 states. I don't really care what Israel calls itself, as long as the Palestinians actually have their own government. And to Mahmoud Abbas, I was hopeful about his leadership when he first came in. He seemed less radical than the former head of the PLO, Arafat. And it looked like he was working on a peace deal, and I was hopeful about that. Obviously, Yitzhak Rabin got assassinated by an Israeli terrorist. And it was unfortunately the most successful act of terrorism that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it rewarded by other right-wingers like Netanyahu, who said, oh great, we killed Rabin. I mean, a terrorist who completely agrees with me politically happened to kill my main political opponent. And I hated peace, he was about to make peace. Now I'll never make peace. Thank you, terrorist, is Netanyahu's position. Okay, so don't tell me Netanyahu doesn't like terrorists. Okay, and by the way, who started Hamas? Israel started Hamas. They thought it was a great idea to split the PLO. Oops. And so by the way, who funded the Mujahideen that turned into the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan? We did, America did. Oops, 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 oops. Okay, here's a simpler solution. Stop imprisoning millions of people. End the occupation today. I see all over social media, oh no, but Cenk, the Palestinians didn't agree to the peace deals we wanted where we would have taken most of their land. So we did not release the prisoners because the prisoners did not know their role and their place. Release the goddamn prisoners, okay? They're all prisoners, you are occupying them. And occupation is not in any way democratic. All right, anyways, the US, guys, let's give up on the mirage that US is neutral. US is, Blinken goes to Israel to do propaganda on behalf of Israel. And last part of it is, the money that they gave to the West Bank, I'll give them credit, was a brilliant piece of strategy. And what they did was they funded people like Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority until they became compliant, because they didn't want the money to stop. So the West Bank is under control because they have leadership that is under control and is not gonna push for a peace deal, it's not gonna push for anything. They're totally compliant. And that's what Blinken went to do in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians should know when they are conquered. We will now fund other people in Gaza and try to make them as compliant as Mahmoud Abbas is, so the Palestinians will never have a state. That's what happened yesterday. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.